Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to talk about the potential problems with the dumbbell reverse fly done traditionally, as you're seeing here, and what we can do about that and how we can fix those problems in an attempt to target the rear delt muscle, because in my estimation that's what most people are really trying to do. So when we're talking about these differences between the exercises you're seeing right here and the exercise that I'm going to recommend instead, we're going to go over the anatomy and the biomechanics and the physics so you can actually understand the why behind what we're talking about. Okay? So first things first, I'll just say that there's nothing necessarily wrong with the two-arm reverse fly. It's just that it's not as specific, remotely as specific to the rear delt as most people think. Why? Well, first we need to start with a perspective on the resistance and the dumbbells in this case specifically and what they're trying to do to the body, right? Because at every point, whether we're looking at the dumbbells in this position or you can't see it behind that pole there, but here's a dumbbell, here's a dumbbell. The dumbbells are just trying to fall toward the floor, right toward the center of the earth, at least hopefully as long as we're on the planet Earth. And to understand what the resistance is doing to the body and specifically where this exercise is most challenging, we simply just need to draw the line of force of the dumbbell upward so that we can see how it's basically going directly through the shoulder in this position and how in this position it's really, really far away from the shoulder, right? So there's basically, like, if I could make a guess, I mean, the dumbbell here as it relates to your shoulder joint is literally 5 times heavier than it is when your arm is even just slightly out to the side, right? In the bottom position, there's effectively no load on the joint in question, specifically the glenohumeral joint, which people commonly refer to as the shoulder joint. All right, so what's the big deal? What's the problem with this? Well, if we think about what the rear delt is going to do, the rear delt is going to pull the arm upward and outward from this position, or really from this starting position to this ending position. So we might ask ourselves, just how much of this range of motion from here to roughly here is completely unloaded for the rear delts? I would pretty much argue every point up until the arm gets to maybe about there. Why? Well, because of this physics stuff, this moment arm stuff. You don't have to be a PhD in any relevant physics domain to actually understand that there's fairly low, if any, load on the shoulder here, even up to the point where we're about halfway through the motion. So really, by the time we get to the top, there's a good amount of load, yes, on the rear delt, but at that point also, there's actually even more load on muscles like the traps. And many of you will feel this specifically because of the fact that the joint that the traps control is actually farther away from the load that the joint that the rear delts control. In other words, that line that we just drew to the weight would be even longer. The second line I'm drawing underneath would be even longer in terms of how much the traps would be loaded and the rhomboids would be loaded relative to the rear delts. So what do we do about this? Does that mean that this exercise is just a waste of time? No, but if we want to load this tissue specifically, the rear delt specifically, what kind of resistance would we want? Well, we would want a resistance that is not just going downward in the bottom this way, but rather a resistance that is actually pushing the arm across the body in this direction. Why? Well, because then that means that we're essentially loading the rear delt from the start of the exercise, right from the get-go, all the way to the end of the exercise, right? Because if you picture, like, if I had a resistance that was pulling the hand in this direction, by the time my arm was this way, that resistance would still be pulling the hand in that direction, right? Thus, the classic cable reverse fly and why that movement is so popular. But I'm not going to show you all that motion because we're sticking with a dumbbell variation here. Here's just one simple change that you can make. It's just we're basically moving from doing a dumbbell raise with 2 arms or a reverse fly with 2 arms to a reverse fly with 1 arm. Okay? And if you're one of those people who's like, oh, I can't do it. It's single arm. It's going to take so long. Okay, it really doesn't take that much longer, right? You basically just don't take rest between sides and it'll end up taking a similar amount of time. Unless, of course, you're supersetting it with another motion. All right, so here is essentially, I'm just letting this play. This is a video from my exercise library. So that's why it has all these little tidbits here. And basically what you can see is we are just simply altering our position around the dumbbell such that in the bottom of the motion, we are loading the rear delt right from the beginning. And pretty much until we get to that end range position that we did in the prior exercise example, we are continuing to load that motion hyper specifically. And so many of you will do this motion and you will immediately not only just feel your rear delt just like crazy, not only under the stretch, but also, by the time we get to the top here, if I can pause it, right? There's still sufficient load on this rear delt, right? It's not like there's no load on the rear delt as there was in the lengthened position of the other exercise, right? Because the dumbbell is pulling our arm this way, so we have this nice long distance, right? And then by the time we get to the bottom, which by the way is when the rear delt is in a relatively stronger position, that distance, in other words, that amount of torque, that moment arm, however you want to say it, right? Physics jargon, look how long that distance is. So we basically put ourselves in a position where same implement, dumbbells just want to fall toward the center of the earth, right? But now all of a sudden we've adjusted our body around the dumbbell such that we can not only actually load the stretch position of the rear delt, but so that we can load more of this total range of motion, way more than in the prior example. And icing on the cake, we can remove some of the stimulus from muscles again, like the traps and like the rhomboids, specifically because of the fact that we're loading this joint, the shoulder joint, more specifically through a greater portion of the range. And so just some setup and execution tips just to finish off this sort of video here, right? Make sure, and this is the biggest point, right? You'll see the tips on the screen, but just make sure that you're really firm with this opposite arm, right? And so this opposite arm is going to be a very, very important thing, specifically because as the dumbbell comes downward in front of you, what the dumbbell is going to try to do is it's going to try to sort of roll your entire body off the bench that way, right? Like someone is sort of pulling the sheets off you, so to speak. And so you need to make sure that throughout the entire range, you are digging your elbow, boom, downward into the bench to prevent your whole torso from rotating off the bench that way. And other than that, it's basically just like pick the grip that's comfortable, whether it be palm, how I have it here, or palm toward the floor, or, as supinated as you can get, right, which would be palm sort of toward the camera in this case, us being the camera. And you can also play around with the arm position, right? So you have a ton of freedom, right? You don't have to direct your arm where I am. You can direct it over here. You can maybe direct it a little bit lower, right? Play around with what feels best specifically for that rear delt. So if you enjoyed this video and you want to learn more about exercise selection and execution, my exercise library is currently running at 70% off for a holiday discount. This video in particular that we were just looking at, as I mentioned, is directly from the exercise library. There are over 230 plus other tutorials that are specific to all the muscle groups. You can literally type in any muscle group you want, figure out exactly how to target it. So if you're interested in that and you want to get the library at a massive discount, the biggest discount I probably will ever run for the library, click the link in the description below, and I'll see you all in the next video.